What will Governor Murphy's proposed budget mean for New Jersey? Listen as we break it all down. This is the Issues Watch Podcast. Hi, I'm Jeff Kazerman, Vice President of Government Relations at the New Jersey Society of CPAs, and welcome to the Issues Watch Podcast. On March 21st, we held a live broadcast with two public policy experts, Richard Keevy and Dale Florio. We examined Governor Murphy's proposed budget for New Jersey's 2024 fiscal year. In this podcast episode, we're going to share segments from the live broadcast. Rich is a distinguished executive in residence at the Rutgers School of Planning and Public Policy, and he's also a lecturer at Princeton University. Rich brings a unique perspective, having served as New Jersey's budget director and comptroller under two different governors from each political party. And Dale is a strategic advisor at Princeton Public Affairs Group and is considered one of the top lobbyists in New Jersey. He has worked on behalf of the NJCPA for years. One note for those of you watching the episode and not just listening, there was a technical problem with Dale's camera, so we only have audio of him. All right, let me get things started with some highlights of the budget proposal. The proposed budget is $53.1 billion, an increase of about 5% from the fiscal year 23 budget. It projects $3.7 billion in revenues over what were the fiscal year 23 projections. The budget proposal includes no new taxes, and it sunsets the 2.5% corporate business tax surcharge, taking us from a 2023 CBT rate of 11.5, the highest in the nation, to 9%. Which is still expected to be fourth highest in the nation. It includes a full payment of $7.1 billion to the Public Workers Pension Fund. It includes $2.35 billion for the Debt Defeasance Fund for a 3-year total that's gone in there of $11 billion. There's a $10 billion surplus. There's a continuation of the Anchor Property Tax Relief Program, which will cost $2 billion, the same as this year. There's a doubling of the child tax credit for certain lower income families. There's an expansion of the Senior Freeze Property Tax Relief Program, with the eligibility limit being raised from $100,000 to $150,000. Direct state school aid would increase $832 million. School funding in total comes to about $20 billion when you consider indirect state funding, such as paying for part of teachers' pensions. And last but not least, municipal aid is close to flat at just under $1.6 billion. Turning to our experts, I asked Rich whether he thinks this is a good budget, a bad budget, or somewhere in between. Here's what he had to say.
I think it's an excellent budget. You've covered a lot of the highlights, and I wrote down a little guidance to myself about 21 good things that I thought I saw in the budget. Let me cover a couple of them, some of which you've covered. We obviously have a balanced budget. The appropriations do not exceed the expected revenues. We have plenty of surplus, which I think is a very good idea. We have, I would say, very modest increase in spending. I heard your numbers, but I would correct that a little bit. We basically are a flat budget compared to the current appropriation level. And I think the revenue estimates are very, very responsible. If anything, they're probably underestimating what I would have projected. So it's a really sound technical budget in terms of surpluses and growth and comprehensiveness of it. And a couple of the main things that I think the governor emphasized, you sort of covered. Property tax relief, that $2 billion for the Anchor program. We can talk a little later about whether that's the best way to give property tax relief. And we expanded the Senior Freeze program, extensive support for K through 12 education, including all of the monies that go to school districts, over $1 billion increase, of which about $350 million is for the funding of the pension and health care for retirees. Increase for student assistance at the colleges, a continuation and expansion of what I think is an excellent Medicaid program for the state, and the corporate tax cut of 2.5%. So if you roll all those things together, dominated by, a very balanced budget, probably even better than what's on paper based upon revenue estimates, I would give it at least an A- for the governor on this budget. It is a well-structured budget in terms of fiscal sanity.
And here's what Dale had to say.
Well, I always look at things through a political lens, Jeff. I guess that's my role as part of the program here today. And, it's a good election year budget for the legislature to run on. What do they say? It's better to be lucky than good. This governor has been tremendously lucky with the environment relative to generating revenue. You can never say that anybody was lucky having to work through the pandemic, but with the pandemic came a lot of unexpected support from the federal government. It also unsurprisingly created huge increases in just all our revenue streams. The economy was doing fine. And we also bonded, right? We talked about this last year on this program. The state also, in anticipation of a downturn relative to the pandemic, went out and generated bonds for revenue purposes. So when you put all that together, there's a lot of money there that, depending on where you sit, you either want to spend it or give some of it back. The governor has given some of it back to targeted constituencies. And now that he's got a corporate tax ready to sunset, I know he proposed it, but key members of the legislature had told him that they weren't going to support a continuation of it. But he's taking the victory lap on that. Senator Sarlo, chairman of the Appropriations Committee, said that he was not going to support continuation. So very lucky. I think one of the things, maybe we'll talk about it a little bit more, the concern by members of both political parties, these things go in cycles, right? We're in the good times in terms of revenues. The economy is so-so. But when does that cliff hit? And I'll be anxious to hear what Rich has to say later in the program. But that's the concern, and that's also the concern with the governor creating new programs that might not be sustainable in the future. Certainly after he's not the governor anymore. But that's what it's been his turn. It'll be his turn for another 2.5 years, and we'll have to see what the future holds. But the question always being asked around the State House is, where is that fiscal cliff?
In his recent budget address, the governor talked about fiscal responsibility and preparing for an economic downturn. Before finding out where Dale and Rich weigh in on that, let's hear what the governor had to say.
This entire budget is purpose-built to help you find your place in the next New Jersey by securing your place in the New Jersey of right now. Indeed, this is a budget focused on the pocketbooks of our families. It provides more direct tax relief to help folks out from under stubborn inflation, which makes it so hard to cover the basics. And with this budget, we will, all of us together, will have cut taxes for our working and middle-class families and our seniors a total of 18 times since we began working together in 2018. 18 tax cuts. Further, this budget will help insulate our state for uncertain economic times. None of us hopes for an economic downturn, that's for sure. But should one occur, we will be on a far stronger footing to react in real time to ensure that critical investments can continue, that our economy can be backstopped, and that vital safety nets can be quickly put up so no one falls through the cracks.
I heard a leader in the business community say that this is a structurally sound budget where the money coming in from recurring revenues equals spending and that there are really no budget gimmicks. But I asked Dale what he thinks about it and what the governor said.
Well, again, better to be lucky than good, and he's been lucky here, right? When you can match your expenditures with your recurring revenues. At the same time, there's a lot of money off to the side that hasn't been spent yet. So, the question always asked is why aren't you using that money to maybe give something back to everybody? I mean, I think you probably have three cynics on the program here today about the anchor program. I think we started it with Governor Byrne, and we continue to make people feel like they're getting money back that was in fact their money. So, and they've raised it to an amount that's not going to be sustainable in years to come. So again, kudos to the administration for being able to make this happen this time around. The question is, where are the other billions of dollars that are off to the side that aren't being utilized? And I think that's the concern many people have.
Rich sits on the Sweeney Center for Public Policy's multi-year budget work group, which issued a report in 2022 that raised concerns about the multi-year fiscal health of New Jersey in the face of a possible recession and the end of billions of federal COVID aid dollars. I asked Rich whether this budget addresses those concerns.
To a large extent, actually, in my opinion, it does. A little bit of background. Most states, I don't know any state that does, do not project a current services budget out for 3 or 4 or 5 years. Ideally, when the governor submits a budget, he should also attach as some supplementary information, a current services projection. In other words, if we continue to fund the programs that we're now doing and assuming different options for revenues, what does the budget look like 3 or 4 years from now? To my knowledge, no state does it. Every state should. I remember from my experiences, we always did it internally in the budget office. So we kind of knew where we were going in the long run, but no governor ever wanted to make it public. To Sweeney's credit, he produced a current services budget. A group of us worked on it, while some people all over the state, all over the country actually participated. And their projections suggested they did 3 different scenarios. Scenario says, let's have a baseline projection of revenue, no change in structure, just a modest increase. What happens if we have a pessimistic scenario? And what happens if we have an optimistic scenario? Let me just pick at the baseline. In other words, if the revenue comes in the same type of way in which it has been coming in, can we sustain this budget? And the projection said, yes, we'll be able to sustain it through fiscal 2027. So think about that. Given the current environment, and given current estimates for revenue structure and the economy and current programs, we have sufficient surpluses that we've accumulated that we'll spend down over a period of time, but we will submit a balanced budget through the year 2027. If you looked at pessimistic projections, we would run into a big problem somewhere around latter part of 2025. And if you projected an optimistic scenario, we would be flush for the next 4 or 5 years. So take your choice. My choice would be, let's take at least the baseline and beware that maybe there's some bad things lying out there. They always got to be thinking about what does this current budget do to the next year. So far, I would say, given the current environment, we look pretty good for a couple of years. And some people take the other approach and say, well, all things could go wrong. Correct.
It appears that the governor is moving somewhat to the right on business issues. For example, his budget lets the CBT surcharge expire, which will cost the state a pretty penny, about $300 million in fiscal year 24 and $1 billion in fiscal year 25. Let's hear what the governor had to say about that.
This budget will allow the temporary 2.5% corporate business tax surcharge to expire. We hear from the business community that allowing this surcharge to lapse will mean more money for them to create jobs, to invest in new and more efficient equipment, to lower costs to consumers, and to be able to stay here. So just as they've trusted us to keep our word in letting this temporary surcharge expire, I'm expecting them to keep theirs with this revenue. But it is much more than this. Ending the temporary surcharge is simply one way we compete for the world's leading companies and at the same time make New Jersey the place where entrepreneurs will want to come to start new ones. From my first day in office, I rejected the false choice that you are either for business or for hardworking families. We can be competitive and more compassionate. A stronger economy builds a fairer New Jersey. And that is how we retain and attract the businesses of the 21st century and beyond, by being strategic, by living our values, and by staying true to our word.
I asked Dale if he thinks the governor has moved to the right on business issues. And if so, is it a real change of heart or just an election year move to help Democrats in the legislature?
Listen, I think it was a great line by the governor, right? I mean, I would think any chief executive would want to see balance in their approach to governing, right? You need employers, but you need a good workforce, right? So I think that's what he was saying. I'm not sure that when he came into office and the first couple of years prior to the pandemic, that the business community felt like there was an attempt at balance, right? But again, great line. I think it's a good message for people. And, in terms of whether it was overly political, yes, it's definitely a move for him. But he's a second-term governor, right? Our last governor, Chris Christie, spent a fair amount of time running for president. Some people have said that that's what this governor is doing. Certainly not on the scale of what Chris Christie did. And, you have a president who hasn't given any indication that he's doing anything else but run. So I think that, the governor is in a position where he is the head of the NGA, National Governors Association, and also the Democratic Governors Association. He holds senior positions there. So he's using that national platform to talk about New Jersey. And, if for some reason President Biden chooses not to run, I think the governor is going to give serious consideration. But if the president does run again, I think at a minimum, this governor wants to be a member of that cabinet, assuming that Biden would win re-election. So, yes, second-term governors in New Jersey do look beyond the borders and take advantage of opportunities. And this governor is no different. And it's understandable. You just want to make sure that, there's people that you're paying enough attention to the home fires. And when you have a good budget situation like he has, it makes it a little bit easier.
Then I asked Rich if he thinks the sunsetting of the CBT surcharge will survive the budget process.
I actually do. I think it was, I don't know what words the governor used, but among other thoughts, we added that surtax because we were running into revenue problems. And he said it would be temporary, and it was actually extended 1 year beyond what it was. And now I think he's saying fairness is fairness. I said I needed the money. I raised the rate. I don't need the money anymore. I'm following through with what I promised. So I think it was, the right decision to do. The folks on the, way left of center would say, well, we need this money for our program. I think that's a hard argument to make when we're sitting on a $10 billion surplus. We could always use some of that if there are certain programs that need to be increased. And even when we go down to 9%. If we're not number one, we're certainly number two on the highest corporate tax in the country. So from a competitive point of view, you don't want to keep it up at 11.5 when you don't need to. Some of the counter arguments were, well, we're only getting that extra percentage from the very, very, very rich corporations. Well, that's true. But those very rich corporations can also pick up and leave if the environment is such that it creates problems for them.
As I mentioned earlier, the budget proposal includes a full pension payment, $7.1 billion, $2.35 billion for debt relief, and a surplus of more than $10 billion. Here's what the governor had to say about that.
We've embraced a radical philosophy. Pay your debts and don't spend more than you make. Over the past 5 years, we have strengthened our foundation more than any administration in decades, and this budget will continue to reinforce our fiscal standing. And the proof of our renewed foundational strength is evident. In a span of 6 months last year, New Jersey received 3 credit rating upgrades. But I am not ready to stop at 3. So this budget is designed to support the next round of credit upgrades. It is designed to build even greater confidence in our direction and in our ability to honestly meet our obligations. To start, this budget will make the 3rd consecutive full payment into our state pension funds. This budget will also set aside more than $2.3 billion to either pay down existing debt or keep us from taking on new debt entirely. But moreover, this budget will better prepare New Jersey for any national or global economic uncertainty with a surplus of more than $10 billion. And that is that $10 billion is nearly 20% of the entire budget.
There's a lot to unpack there, so we started with the surplus, which the Republican leadership is saying is too large. I asked Rich whether he thinks the surplus is too large.
I think not. I would have put some of the surplus into a rainy day fund so that, by definition, if it's in surplus, you could be using it for the next year. If you put it into a rainy day fund, it really locks it up and can't be accessed until there was, quote, a real emergency. Notwithstanding that, if you remember our discussion maybe 10 or 15 minutes ago about the current services projections for the next 3 or 4 years, we'll be able to continue our programs, but we need to have that surplus available to offset some of the rising costs. So I think a lot of people are missing the point that the surplus isn't just for this year. It has to be husband, if you will, for the next few years. And so I think a good surplus at that level is really good. I want to make another point. When we say we have a surplus of X, it is done on proper accounting basis. It is done on a GAAP basis, not a cash basis. Many states, their budget shows a surplus, but it's a cash surplus. And when you look at their financial statements, you'll see they're in a deficit. Not so in New Jersey. We have been forever on a GAAP basis of accounting for our budget, which is really extraordinarily excellent. So we have, even through difficult times, we have ended all years with a balanced budget one way or another, but it's always been on GAAP accounting system. So that's really positive.
The budget includes a $7.1 billion pension payment, meeting the actuarially required contribution for the 3rd year in a row, which is something applauded by groups across the political spectrum. I asked Rich what shape our pension and benefit systems are in and what the state's unfunded pension and health benefit obligations are.
Here's some quick observations. First on the pension and then on the health benefits. So currently we're about 54% funded. So theoretically, we're still underfunded. But we have been putting the money back in based upon what the actuary says we should put in each year. And if you look at, I just pulled up a schedule that was in the last official statement issued by the state. And if you look at that, you'll see that for the next 25 years, it assumes that we'll continue about $7.1 billion each year to about the year 2049, and then we'll be fully funded. So there's no expectation, based upon current views by the actuary, that we're going to be able to, A, reduce the pension system, nor are we going to be required to increase funding. So one should assume that over the next 20 years, if we want to have a funded pension system, we need to continue at about that $7.1 billion that we have a fully funded. And
So we're looking.
just digress for a second. I don't think it makes too much difference whether we're 70%, 80%, or 100%. The goal is always to be 100%. Most states aren't anywhere near that. We may be at the low end of the spectrum, but have been approaching sanity. On the health benefits, it is not funded on an actuarial basis. Our healthcare system is totally present day funding. Whatever we need that year, we put in, even though the out year costs are increasing for those people who enter the retirement, because the state covers a large portion of retirement costs for state employees and teachers. Remember, the pension system for retirees also covers the teachers as well as state employees. So the health benefits program is also underfunded substantially if you look at it in the same context as the pension system. But it is on a pay-as-you-go basis. And those numbers will increase each year. I don't know what level it's at now, quite frankly. I didn't check, but I think we put in about $2.5 to $3 billion a year for state employees and for the teachers.
The next step for the governor's budget proposal is a thorough review by the legislature. I asked Dale whether he thinks the legislature will make any significant changes.
Unlikely. I think where the changes, or at least the pressure for changes, will occur will be to add things. The governor's been, pretty good on pushing back. Typically, you have a number of the total budget, and there's a lot of rearranging of numbers internally. But the governor will face a lot of pressure. We've seen more and more, again, because of the largesse, we've seen more and more asks for things that you might not have seen 8 or 9 years ago, certainly in the Christie administration, because they didn't have money. And same thing with the Corzine administration. They were on hard times in terms of money. But you'll see the request to fix the firehouse and the Little League field and those kinds of things that we haven't seen in a while. So that's where the pressure will come from. Whether the governor acquiesces or not, we'll certainly find out.
Then I asked him whether he thinks the business community will be able to persuade the legislature to add money to the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund and/or other programs to assist small businesses.
I think there'll be some effort, Jeff, but I see it falling short. There's a big difference between helping a company with its unemployment insurance obligation versus putting $1,500 to $2,000 in somebody's pocket. I just, helping the business community is somewhat monolithic. Like, what is it? There's also other issues. This might be at the top of the list, but there are other issues that typically the business community, that broad term of what that is typically asking for. So I'd be very surprised if that was included in this year's budget.
And Rich added this.
The 2.5% cut related to the corp tax benefited a very small group of corporations, whereas the UI is going to benefit a heck of a lot of corporations, small business, medium size. So there's two different groups that are being addressed. So to suggest that I did one thing, therefore it abrogates my need to do the other, is not consistent. So I don't know what the magic number is, but I personally, from a left of center guy, would say we should put some assistance in there. I don't know what the number is. I think I heard $1 billion of unemployment insurance shortfall, but I'm not sure. So, and we still have some federal money that has not been allocated. And it's one-time money, just as this would be one-time money. So I think it would be appropriate to put some money into the unemployment insurance fund from the state in one way, shape, or form.
As we wrapped up the presentation, I asked Rich and Dale for their closing thoughts. Here's what Rich had to say.
Back to my first comments in the beginning, a good balanced budget. No trick, well, there's always a little bit, but no trickery in this budget. The revenue estimates are good. They're greater than the expenditure projections. That's good. Plenty of surplus. Modest spending increases. Responsible revenue estimates. And providing relief to corporations to some degree, and expanding programs for the less fortunate. So, gotta give them a minus at least.
And now here are Dale's closing remarks.
Just, the political observation, certainly that, Governor presented a budget that, he can say that it's not raising taxes. Seems to cover all the bases that he wants to cover programmatically. It's one that the legislature, the majority party Democrats can go back home and say that, we're maintaining services. And in fact, for many of you, you'll put more money in your pocket. So it's a great election year budget for people. And you'll hear the usual arguments from the Republicans that spending has increased too much, that we need to put more money, back in everybody's pocket. And it'll be, the Democrats' recent add of $100 million plus to the K through 12 budget will blunt the argument made by Republicans back in their home districts that they're getting shortchanged from a school funding standpoint. The formula is still a problem. This is just a temporary fix, but it will have an impact and won't allow the Republicans to claim that they're not getting enough in terms of school funds. So, the typical political arguments will continue, Jeff, but the governor will dodge another one, based on the largesse that the state's been able to accrue.
Big thanks to Rich and Dale for joining us once again to dissect the governor's budget proposal. I know I learned a lot, and I hope you did too. To follow the progress of the budget, visit njcpa.org/NJBudget. Thank you for listening and watching.